my name's Laurence.
Pleased to meet you, Laurence. My name's Jeff.
Jeff
Lovell.
Lovell. And you are from KB?
Well, I actually started work in 1958 at Doncaster Mining Sculpture.
58?
Yeah, and obviously, like most mining entrants, I started on the haulage.
Yeah.
But you know, talk about the NCB, it was very, very good for safety, and one of the things it did do, it made sure that you had a good basic training. And,
the National Coal Board?
Yes, the National Coal Board as it was then, and which was formed, vesting day were in 1947, that it really started in 1948, so it had been nationalised for 10 years when I joined in 1958.
58, that's just a long time ago.
Well, it is a long
60,
time.
how many?
Yeah, it's
58?
quite a long time ago.
2008 is 50 years. 60 years ago?
60, yes, it's 60
So
years.
how old were you?
Yeah, I was 15.
15?
Yeah, I'm 75 now.
Are you really?
Yeah, and so as I say, we did his basic training, and I did that at Manvers Main Colliery Training Centre with all the boys from the number 3 Rotherham area, as they called us then.
Okay.
And so I did my training at Manvers Training Centre along with hundreds of other boys, because it was a big industry then.
Yeah.
And then we'd spend a few days at Mexper Schofield Technical College,
Yeah.
where you learnt all about the theoretical thing about mining, and then went the day, which we were there for about 16 weeks, on 2 or 3 days a week, and the other time was spent at the training centre, where you went underground, accompanied by a supervisor, and learnt the skills of what you needed to do when you started underground full-time at your own colliery, which you see in my case was Doncaster Mining Sculpture,
Right.
and which of course was a sister pit to KB pit,
Okay.
which was a mile further up the road towards Doncaster than Doncaster, which is the other way towards Rotherham, if you like, but
Yeah.
it is Doncaster Main, of course.
And is that on
in the
past
Doncaster.
Conisbrough?
Yeah, it's near Conisbrough,
Yeah.
and you know, everybody that lives in Doncaster and Conisbrough, they all seem to be part of the same community.
Right.
And of course, when I went back to the mine, you had to be 16 years old then to work underground.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was about 15 and a half then, and of course I spent my time in the pithead baths of all places.
Baths? Baths,
Pithead
sorry.
baths where the people
Washed and...
washed and
End
got
of
changed
shift.
at the end of shift. Now,
And what were you doing? What were you doing in the bed baths?
Well, you would clean the
Clean it
cubicles
all
down,
out.
you'd be a general, polish the brasses every Friday, because the brasses in the pithead baths used to gleam, and
Wow.
but I did that while I was 16 years of age, and then before I was 15 I was taken on a couple of underground visits and by the training officer, and which, you know, very, very good. And on reaching the age of 16 in November 1958, that's when I started underground. In the Parkgate seam. There was 2 seams at Doncaster Colliery. One was the Barnsley seam, which was about 7'6" thick, but left 2'6" of coal beds, what we used to call the day beds.
The
And
day
it-
beds?
Yeah, they call it the day beds because if they'd taken away all the coal, the roof was very friable and subject to breaking and causing difficult conditions. So they left the day beds up, which made it for a good working roof. The beauty about the Barnsley steam as well, that it weren't mechanised. They still had, it was all hand filling, pulling
Right.
coal off with a pick, filling it into a tub, taking it to the gate, which is where the air comes in one way and the return air goes the other way. And they would twist the tub and they would take it out into the gate or the roadway, and it would then be attached to a pony who would pull the tubs away to an endless haulage which used to run down the roadway. But in fact, it was quite unusual, this phase, because when I started there, it was nearly 1,700 yards in length, which is most unusual, but it was a series of stalls, and it was the long wall method. And,
Long haul method.
long wall,
Long
which
wall.
means that it's total extraction, and then as the face advances, you actually put the packs on behind the face to
You collapse the roof.
yeah, and the roof collapses between the waste that you build. But I started working the Park Gate scene, which was a different scene because they used to have what they call middle coal cutters that used to cut along the long wall face and cut out about that much, about 9-10 inch of coal. And the coal was pre-bored, and unlike where the bars we seen, we were all used to pull it off with handpick, you used to use explosives to pull down the coal, and then as a filler or a collier, you used to then fill the coal out, set your supports, which consisted of a steel strap bar and a rigid steel prop with a lid between, because obviously you don't put steel and steel together because the way it would come on, it would skittle it out. So you use the...
Say that again. So just you don't put steel and steel together
no,
because
because
the weight...
they slip. So you used to put a wooden lid between. And then
This
as
is
the
a-
weight came on,
you're
it
talking
would
about props.
press onto it, yeah.
So a steel, for example, a steel plate in the roof,
Yes,
that hit the steel vertical,
yeah,
it would slip and slide.
yes.
So you had that much movement underground.
That's right. So you would put a little wooden lid between to counter out the slippage, and it would also take some compression as well. Yeah, and the Park Gate scene, it had above it a 75 metre sandstone bed. And one of the things I always learned, obviously, when I first went underground at KB Pit, I actually, for the first 20 days, I was under close personal supervision, where you didn't leave your supervising workman's side. You learnt all the different methods of the haulages and moving the tubs around the pit bottom to send to the in-by districts. And then, of course, a team of a couple of young boys like myself and what they call an haulage corporal would take the supplies in-by, and then the empties would come out later in the shift, and we would spend our time getting the empties out of the mine, because I worked near the shaft, and the full supplies would come in, and obviously when the empties came back, you would put the empties back onto the shaft. That was just one of the jobs, of course. And
Usually for young men.
well, there were young people, because it's just like any industry. The young people are the lifeblood of the industry, whichever you're working in. And of course, there was quite a lot of older men as well. And if I tell you, when I started work, there was one man 70 years old who was still working. And of course, years and years before I started, there were lots of people in the 80s working.
So if that guy was 70, sorry, it's just like, that guy was 70.
Yeah,
He probably went in there when he was 2015.
probably
He
50.
started in the
well,
19th century.
Well, yeah, he probably started when he was 12, 13 years of age,
So
14
in
years of age.
1890.
Well, yeah, he'd probably, when, I mean, in the middle of the 19th century, there were people as young as 10-year-old working in the mines. And of course, before the 1840s, there was females used to work in the mine.
Really?
And then the Coal Mines Act was passed, which said that ladies would not be allowed to work in the coal mines. And I think they put the age up to 12 years of age. Now, my brother is 10 years older than me, and he was 14 when he started at the mine.
Wow.
So, but they made it 15 to start work with the NCB, and of course 16 before you went underground.
Yeah.
So my brother went underground when he was 14.
Gosh.
Looked after, and of course, if you've got the aptitude, you could certainly go on and do further education. But as I say, I worked in the pit bottom at Denby Main Colliery for 12 years, and then the training officer wanted me to go work with the surveyors as what were called the linesmen.
Mm.
And I used to assist the qualified surveyors with doing surveys underground, because it is essential that the surveyor is able to plot onto plans the position of all the underground workings, etc. And you know, they had to keep these plans up to date. That was just one of the jobs that they had to do. But our main responsibility, in addition to helping the surveyors carry out their theodolite surveys and any other surveys that they wanted to do, was keeping the roadways straight.
All right.
Now, the reason that you need to keep the roadways straight is that if you allow it to go anywhere and you've got an haulage rope on it, if you got out of line, the haulage rope would rub into the supports or into the side of the roadway. And likewise with the conveyor belt, if the roadway, the line went right, of course the conveyor would want to rub at the sides of the roadways as well. So it was an essential part that we kept the roadways straight. And to achieve this, we're all equipped with there's tape measures and there's ball of string and there's chalk, and we used to have a mining dial.
Dial?
Yeah, which is like a sextant
Right.
on a tripod. And we used to, and don't forget that when you put centre lines on underground, the roadway arches used to move. So you would have to ensure that you put a base mark into the strata. Now the strata comes straight down now, but the roadway arches move from side to side and get crushed and distorted. So we used to set up the tripod right under the benchmark, and then we all used to have a flame safety lamp,
Yeah.
and we would set up so as we knew that we were exactly, and that we were aiming to keeping the roadway straight by setting up under that benchmark. And then we would go forward, and I would hold up a flame safety lamp, and the man that was on the mining dial would look through the hairs on the eyepiece till he could see the flame on the flame safety lamp dead central.
All right.
And I then used to put a mark on.
Because it was very dark, I suppose.
Yeah, it was dark. And the other thing, of course, is that sometimes we did use a plumb bob, but we found out that the further away that you were, you would have more accuracy.
Right.
Because if you did it closer, you'd tend to wander a little bit. So we always did it as far away as we could to put the centre line on, because it was more accurate.
Oh.
Then every 3 months we would have the theodolite surveys.
So
And
what's the theodolite?
it's an instrument which is more accurate than the mining dial, but use a right face and a right face method to carry out your surveys and
So
checking out the roadways.
On a tripod.
Yeah, and
The
this was on a
hair-raising.
tripod. It was a different machine, but it used to take 2 readings, a right face and a left face. And then he used to work out, and he would put on the, he would check the centre lines that was okay, because it was essential that you keep the roadways straight. And of course, not only did the surveyor do, we also used to do levels as well, because all the scenes inclined, they either to the dip or to the rise, so it was essential that you worked out the distance that you were from the surface. There was no problem that we were going to get to the surface in the Park Gate scene, because we were working at 750 yards. And of course the Barnsley scene were only 447 yards. And it's good that I can remember these figures, because we're working with the safety, with the surveying department, you learnt all the different levels of the seams and various different types of coal, etc. And it was very interesting.
So this was geological, really?
Yeah, it is geological, and what you always have to remember, that if anything goes wrong at the mine, there are only 2 people that can be prosecuted for a breach of mining practices, and that was the colliery manager and the head surveyor.
Really?
Yeah, you know, and you always remembered that. So it was a very, very responsible job being the head surveyor, and of course being the
So
college
were
manager.
you a head surveyor?
No, I was only a linesman.
So the
as I say,
linesman literally means the guy that gets the line straight.
Yeah, that's why they call you linesman, and it was good. I really enjoyed it, and the beauty of me going with them. Not only did I go in the Parkgate scene, but I was going into the Barnsley scene as well, which was completely different type of working to what I did in the Parkgate scene. So I was with the surveyors from 1960 or 1962, and in 1962, of course, 18 years of age, or going into 19 by that time, I did my, what they call, coal-face training, which involved 60 days hand filling coal onto a conveyor, 20 days learning coal cutting.
So the conveyor was replacing the ponies?
Yes, that were were a little bit more mechanised in the Parkgate, but they still had the ponies in the Barnsley scene, but down in the Parkgate we had conveyor on the coal face, which you threw your coal onto the face conveyor, it went to the roadway conveyor, where it was then taken out of, taken to the, what we call the discharge station, which was about 3 mile away, where the coal was then
3 mile away?
Yeah, it was then transported into mine cars, where it was then taken to Cadeby Colliery, and taken up adrift into the Barnsley.
How was it transported 3 miles?
Because that was the distance
How
that
did
we
you do
were
it?
out. Well, obviously you have transfer points, and
So is it on rails or
no, on the coal conveyor.
on that bloody great conveyor for 3 miles?
Yeah, and you have discharge points. We used to discharge it onto the conveyor, and then via various loading points, as they call them, we then go to the discharge station, where it were loaded from a conveyor into the mine cars, which held 7 ton of coal. Unlike the Barnsley steam coal tubs, which only held half a ton. So you see there's a big difference.
Good God, so is that pit ponies can
And
only
of
handle...
course, the mine cars, we had diesel locomotives underground, diesel locomotives,
But they
which
stunk.
then,
Jeez.
well, you see, again, we were working in what they call a flame-proof mine, and we were subject to methane, and
God,
so
yeah, that's all right.
but there were diesel engines underground which had flame traps on, and the air was clean before it went into the locomotive, and then it were cleared through a soda ash box, so as you weren't putting too much
soda ash.
soda ash, which took out a lot of the like the CO out of the diesel fumes, and then the air was discharged back into the ventilation. But it did smell. But it didn't do me any harm anyway. I'm still here.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we did. I did 60 days coal face training, then did 20 days coal cutting, 20 days advancing the coal face conveyor, 20 days forming the roadways behind the coal face, and another 20 days packing and drawing off, which was getting the supports so as they could be used again, because you didn't leave the supports then. And as you build the packs on the face, like I mentioned in the Barnsley scene, and of course the thing about it is the Parkgate scene, the gulf didn't break very often. But you knew when the gob was going to break, because as I said, it was sandstone. And I'll tell you, we used to go out in the gate when it was about to break, because you could see the roadway moving, you could see the...
Really?
Yeah, and we used to go in the gate, and all of a sudden there'd be a mighty woof, and down it came, a big gust of wind, and then it would not break for another 3 or 4 weeks.
When you say the roadway, what do you mean the roadway?
That's the roadway that you need to maintain behind the coal face to put in your haulages for your supplies, and the middle gate was always the fresh air, where the fresh air came in, and then usually we had 2 return gates with the ventilation split, and then when it got to the far end of the coal face, we called it the return gate, or the tailgate. There was all sorts of different mining terms. And in the Parkgate scene, we did use in some parts, in outer roadways, steel supports. But in the Parkgate roadways behind the coal face, we used to set wood supports, which we call cockering or herringbone.
Cockering.
And we used to put a long...
Record that, Danny.
Oh, cockering, yeah.
We need some terminology for the
yeah,
pavement. So
yeah.
any terminology you've got.
Then the thing, a lot of pits call it herringbone, but Deneby and KB and quite a few pits in the area, they call it cockering. And what it went...
spelling that?
Cockering. And the thing about it were, you put up a piece, your rip was down on the floor, you had a prop, you got onto the top of the heap and you set a long piece of timber to support it. And then what you did, you had some wooden arms that you set like that, which held that, and then you put another two at the other end of the long piece of timber that you'd put up, and then you knocked out the piece that you got on the heap, and that would sit. And as the weight came down, it did that. You tightened them,
So
but
it's
it
a
tightened up,
self-strengthening.
but it was a sandstone roof. And the thing about the Parkgate seam is we used to have to use what they called air legs. Silver threes, they call them, Holman silver threes. And we used to have to, it used to take about 2 hours to bore the rip. And boy, did those drills make a noise. And that was the days before actual people were hearing defenders. It wasn't compulsory then, so they weren't provided. And it was like everything else as well. Before 1970, the Health and Safety Act came in. You used to buy all your own safety equipment.
Right, so no one bothers.
Helmets, yeah, you bought it all, your knee pads, your boots, your clothing that you wore, you know, and you even had to buy your shovel that you filled the coal with, yes. You had to buy the shovel. And they called it tool money, and every week they would take out a certain amount of money over a period length of time to cover the tools with which were covered for
So
shovels, hammers and picks.
How are they contracted, the miners? What they when they're bringing their own tools? I mean, nowadays, if you bring all your own tools to work, etc., you're considered self-employed.
Yes.
I mean, is there a similar thing then, or is it?
No,
they were
we
contracted to
were all employees of the National Coal Board, but as I say, when the Health and Safety Act came in 1972, and it was 74 before it was really implemented, that then put an end to the days when you actually had to pay for your boots, your helmets, and all the personal protective equipment was supplied free, and it was provided by the employer. And I mean, I do remember the days when some old colliers would go looking in the rubbish bins in the pit head baths to see if they could find a pair of boots that somebody had thrown away, which was better than their own. And one old collier that I know very well, I'm looking at him one day and I looked down at his boots and I said, "Do you know you've got 2 right feet on
No.
boots?" And he said, "Yeah, I couldn't find
Wow.
a left and a right, so I had
God.
to use it." And that were people, you know.
Yeah.
But then of course the days came when they got them free, so everybody had a reasonable pair of boots. And the thing is that every 12 months you could, if they were worn out, you could certainly take them back and have them replaced, along with knee pads and helmets, etc., things of that nature.
Yeah.
So times did alter. So I mean,
So the coal board was a good thing.
The coal board was a very good employer, and it were only like any other employers. They didn't have to provide the safety equipment, the workers, just like on the construction sites, they would have to provide all their own safety equipment. And but I mean, when I started underground, there was still a few men wearing schoolboy caps or skull caps.
Scott with those leather.
Yeah, leather caps, and of course they then made it law in about 1959 that everybody would wear a proper type protective helmet. And funnily enough, I still remember one or two who wore the safety helmet, but underneath had still got the cloth cap.
Really?
You know, they were very, very reluctant to change. And especially the man that I mentioned who was 70 odd years of age, he always used to wear his flat cap and then have his pit helmet on top.
So, did you have for much time with this 71-year-old miner? Was he a
Yeah,
character you...
well, what he did employ, because obviously in advancing years, and you know, but he used to go around greasing the pulleys on the haulage ropes, and because the steel rope used to run on pulleys, and he used to grease the pulleys, and which it was an essential bar, because if a pulley got made up and it weren't running round, the haulage rope is running on it, eventually it would wear some of the outer layers of the haulage rope away, and it would also rub the pulley away, and the pulley would give way first. So it was an essential part of the job. And but there was, you know, there's quite a few men that I mentioned that one guy, but there was a few others as well that were in advance. But of course, then they brought it in that everybody would retire at 65 years of age, around about 1961, 62. So everybody retired had to retire at 65. So yeah, I finished.
So does that mean up to that point you had a choice when you stopped work?
Yes, well, you were compulsory then. It was made 65 years of age.
Before then, you had a choice.
Yeah, people could carry on working, and of course once I had finished my coalface training, they're deemed competent, but not fully competent. So obviously, when you were fresh new in the coal, the old colliers as they were, they would make sure that you were all right, and they would give you, you would still go through that learning curve as you went on. And
Never
so I was actually, in 1962, I passed out as. But what I did like about the training at Denby Main Colliery, that it was a full training schedule. Now I know there are a lot of other pits in the area that some of the boys would only do the coalface training, and then they won't go through all the other skills of ripping the roadways, coal cutting, belt tin, anything. But we did it all at Denby, and I found it very, very helpful when I went in, because I would see men who'd never turned their face about before and tell them how to do it, because they'd never done it before, which came in very handy. And so I remained as a filler stroke collier right up to 1968, 68, and I always remember in 1968 the under manager came along to me and just said to me, I would like you to become a mine official, i.e. become a shop fighter, deputy and eventually overman. And I just said, well, I'll come and see you when I'm ready, because I'm not happy with the manager that we've got at the mine.
Oh, really?
He treats his officials with contempt, and when he's gone I'll certainly consider it. And eventually the manager did go, and so I went around.
Were you ambitious?
Yes.
So you really wanted
Yes,
it?
I did.
So you waited despite the chances of advancing your career?
Like most men, I had a good name, and obviously the under manager had, he'd spotted me, and that's why he came and had a word with me. And like I said, I gave him the reason why I wouldn't go at that time. But some 12 months later, the manager, he left, and so a few weeks later I went round and I knocked on the under manager's door, and come in and opened the door, and he just said, right, you'll be on the next officials course. So he hadn't forgot. And so shortly afterwards I went on the officials course, and which lasted for 6 months.
And was
lots
that
of practical,
completely different from the...
Yeah, that I did at Maxwell Schofield Technical College. And
That's theoretical?
Yes, theoretical, a lot of theoretical, and also went on visits to all the collieries in the area.
And I presume you're with a load of other guys?
Yeah, there were about 20 of us.
So the funny sort
I
of
was one of the younger ones, actually. There were a couple younger than me, and quite a few that were older who had done.
So presumably you're developing contacts with overmen or whatever, the deputies from other pits all the time?
Yeah, and that lasted 6 months, and I then became what we call a gate end supervisor. which was firing shots at main gate end, or the loading gate. And so I did that for about 5 years, and
Firing shots?
I was very, very good at it. That's the reason I kept there, because
Firing shots, what do you mean?
explosives were, there was shot holes bored into the coal, and as a shot firer you used to carry detonators, and the men used to bring in the explosives in what they call a 5-pound canister, powder bag, which was a term that they used. But by this time we'd gone on to mechanised faces, and we had what they call a power loader. We used to go through the face, cutting the coal, not men filling on with shovels onto a conveyor. And I used to have what they call a stable, which was in advance of the face, where they used to use a coal cutting machine, and then the men would drill the holes, and in the bottom cut coal and the top cut coal, and I would fire the explosives. I would also fire the explosives, fire the rippings, which again they had been bored, and by this time I was in the Hague seam, where it was a much gentler strata.
A more?
In the Hague Moor, which we later called the Swallowwood seam. So they altered the name at some time in the early 70s, from the Hague Moor to the Swallowwood seam. And in addition to looking after the stable and the ripping, I was also responsible for ensuring that the men did the work in a safe manner, because they're responsible for the whole safety and welfare of the men, and used to test for fire damp. Not much of a problem usually in the intake gates, but if you were doing a similar job in the return airway, don't forget the ventilation would travel through the face. It would pick up all the gases, methane usually, that were given off, and you could have gas pockets in the return airway, particularly at the ripping lip. So
just to go back to your training as what was it? You were training as an overman, and
you went to do training to firstly become a shot firer or a district deputy.
And so you got guys probably like you who are taking classes, diagrams on blackboards.
Well, yeah, they were all college lecturers. And,
so you're going right. This is how mine. You know, if you get a fire in the outward pit, you get. So you have you have this going on and on.
Yeah, they were all college lecturers that used to. But what I did omit to say is that when I had done my officials training, I decided that I would carry on with further education. So I actually, the first 12 months after I'd finished my officials course, I then went to Mexford Schofield Technical course to do the General Certificate in Mining,
right,
which I subsequently passed. And then from that course I then progressed to the what they call the Technician's Certificate, which was 1 day a week for 3 years, whereas the Coal Mining Certificate was for 3 years and 1 day a week. And then, as I say, I went on to the Technician's course and a Coal Mining Technician's course. And the first year I did at Mexford Schofield Technical College, and then I moved on to Doncaster College, which was that we went to the annex down at Ellis Road, and I did the final 2 years of the Coal Mining Technician Certificate there. The Coal Mining Certificate and the coal mining was all about theory of coal mining, and which I found very, very interesting. There was various different subjects that you did. Obviously coal mining technology, we did maths and all this thing, which certainly improve your skills in mathematics and trigonometry and things of that nature. Cool. And of course did the 3 years on the technician's course, and then...
Jesus, how long does all this training take?
That was the way it was built up, the coal board. And then from then on, after the technician's course, that's when I then did the High National certificate
God,
at Doncaster
I
College.
trained to become a doctor.
Yeah, for 2 years actually. So yeah, it took quite a number of years, but by 1972, I'd certainly gone through all the courses and then sat the mining legislation at Doncaster College of Art, where we sat that, and obviously to pass the mining legislation, you certainly had to put in a lot of your spare time learning about all the regulations and the different acts, and but I was successful in passing that.
Good Lord.
So, just like, you know, not only me, there were other lads similar age, some older, and some a little bit younger than myself, and they all wanted to better themselves, and that was the reason that you were doing it. And
So was there a culture developing between you and the guys working underground? Was there a...
well, the culture, it's like anything. The one thing I do want to say about the coal mining industry is there's very, very good comradeship. Because, I mean, I can recall a few accidents, I can recall a couple of fatalities, and everybody was there to help out in emergency.
Yeah.
And, you know, I have seen some really, really serious injuries, and I have been involved with a couple of fatalities, and, you know, that was, but
Are these fatalities...
But they didn't happen very often. If I recall back to when, my father started work in the coal mining industry in 1920, and of course he was in the 1926 strike.
Mm.
And of course, coal mining then it was private enterprise.
Mm.
And there could be 2 or 3 fatalities each year at a colliery. And but as I say, it was when I started in '48. The industry it started in '48 with the National Coal Board, when it was owned by the nation, and it became a much safer industry to work in. I do remember a few explosions taking place, not at the pits that I worked at, but I always remember the one at Six Bells Colliery in Wales in 1960, and that claimed the lives of 60 men. You know, so that we were still having the odd explosions, but pretty good in the South Yorkshire area. We didn't have any explosions at that time, apart from the odd small ones and inrushes of gases, which I remember at Cortland Colliery in 1961. And, what I did do as well when I was an official, I did become a member of the colliery rescue team.
All right.
Because each colliery had KB, Denemy and other larger pits. They had to maintain what they call part-time rescue brigadesmen. So about once a month you did your rescue, your mines rescue training, which involved a week at the Rotherham Rescue Station. And then once a month we used to go for training, wearing self-contained breathing apparatus and going and carrying out mock exercises in the gallery that they had there. So again, found that very, very interesting.
The gallery was a thing made up for training?
Yes, we had the gallery set up, we used to set up mock explosions. We used to have smoke bombs in there. Well, I say smoke bombs, but it was like a capsule that you used to give off dense smoke, and you used to carry out your practice where you could not see your team member next to you, and you used to rely on the signals that you had, the horn, to communicate between each other, because you'd got self-contained breathing apparatus on and you couldn't take it off, so you relied on your signals. But it was a little bit difficult when you were in a smoke-filled atmosphere, but we certainly managed to do what we'd got to do, and usually recovering a casualty on a stretcher that was the heaviest thing I've ever carried in my life, because they were purposely made heavy.
Really? Why is that?
Well, it was to simulate what it would be like carrying a body underground.
Not in real life?
Yeah, no. So that was very interesting, and of course in 1978 In 77 I then became a colliery overman, which you were in charge of all the operations on a coal face.
Gosh.
Whereas the district deputy was responsible for the safety of the men and going around the district, checking for gas, etc.
District is an area in the mine.
Yes, it was a designated area which that deputy, twice a shift, had to go round to inspect that everything was safe. But as an overman, you're still responsible for health, safety and welfare, but you were the man that made sure that the production targets was reached. We didn't always reach them. Sometimes we exceeded them. Sometimes we fell short because of various mechanical breakdowns normally. But you know, you only needed a conveyor to break down out by, and you know, that would stop the coal face producing coal, etc. But this were all the things that you used to have to contend with as an overman and as a deputy, of course. Because if you weren't there, you were sent to and they wanted an overman there, the deputy would then have to ensure that the production came out of the various coal faces. But in 1978, I applied to be the safety engineer at Silverwood Colliery, which is situated about 4 miles from Rotherham town centre. So I started here on the 31st of July 1978 as the safety engineer, and I had a department of 40 men, from methane drainage borers to coal dust samplers, to stone dust barrier lads, to dust control boys, a safety officer, a fire officer, a ventilation officer, stone dust barrier deputy and various other officers, and so it was quite a large department, which certainly it was very, very hard.
Was it?
But yes, I find it, well,
Stressful?
hard. It's stressful, yes, very stressful, but a lot of people didn't see that side, but you had to be in it to experience it. And of course, every other week we had a visit from the HMI, Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Mines, and I would accompany him along with the colliery manager, and he would go along, and if anything he found wrong, the manager and me with the things that I could deal with would certainly get put right, because I would guarantee that the next visit he made, he would want to see that you'd done all these tasks.
Yeah.
And the first thing he would say to me, Mr. Lovell, what have you done since my last visit? And the last thing I did would say to him, nothing. So I would make sure that through various means, whether it be through the under managers or even through my own department, would make sure that these jobs were carried out to completed.
Yeah.
So I had an answer for him when he came back, and obviously when we visited that place again, he would make sure that those things had been covered, because don't forget, at a mine it's not just one coal face. We had several coal faces, and we had about 20 miles of roadways, so you know, but I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed every minute of it.
Oh, fascinating. Fascinating. I mean,
Well, the thing about it is, and I mean, I've not mentioned it, and just like a lot of people that you will have interviewed, I've certainly come from a mining family on both sides, on my father's side and my mother's side, and on my mother's side, my grandfather came from Southern Ireland, and he resided in Manchester for a while, and being 80, and he married a girl from St Helens in Lancashire, and they moved to Barnsley, and he lived in Barnsley for a short period of time and worked at one of the Barnsley pits, I don't know which one. And then in 1899 he moved to Dennery, Maine, which was a colliery village built by the Dennery and KB amalgamated collieries, and there was rows and rows and rows and rows of terraced houses. And so he came to Dennery in 1899 and started work there, and he couldn't read or write. As I say, he was from Southern Ireland, and he worked at Dennery Main Colliery, and he was a collier, and he worked to being 80 years of age.
80 years of age?
80 years of age. And then after that, after he'd retired, they used to tip the coal outside the houses, and he used to go around throwing the coal into the coal houses for a few shillings. Now, on my father's side, I do know that one of my ancestors in 1817 lived in Somerset, and he moved up in 1817 to Doncaster, and he was a pedlar. So that was my great-great-great-grandfather.
Jeez. And
he was a pedlar, but I do know that my great-grandfather, my grandfather's father, he was a motor engineer in 1902. And I thought, that's rather unusual, a motor engineer in 1902. But my grandfather, Lovell, he joined the army at 17, and he fought in the Boer War, which lasted for a couple of years, and in 1900 he moved from Doncaster with my granny, who he married while I was in the army, who came from a place called West Weldon in Hampshire, and they came to live up here, and he first lived in Conisbrough, and then in 1904-05 he moved into Dennery from Conisbrough, and he started work at Cadeby Colliery.
1 hour in Laurence.
Okay.
And he certainly he worked at Cadeby Colliery, and but I've not mentioned it, but while he was there in 1912 there was an explosion.
Oh, yeah. KB disaster?
Yeah, which killed 88 people.
This was what, sorry, 1912?
1912, on the 9th of July 1912. And there was 2 explosions. The first explosion killed 35 people. And but the thing about the KB Main colliery explosion is that on the day before the explosion occurred, there was a visit to Conisbrough Castle. King George V and Queen Mary visited Conisbrough Castle, and what a lot of the miners did, they actually took the day off to go and see the King and Queen, and so this affected the amount of men that were working on the day shift and the afternoon shift, and of course the night shift, because it's not every day that the King and Queen come to Conisbrough or to South Yorkshire. They did do other visits. They visited Silverwood Pit on one day, and they also visited the stay at Wentworth Woodhouse. So that was the 8th of July that they visited Conisbrough Castle, so quite a few miners took the day off to see the King and Queen.
Oh.
And on the night shift in question, there was normally...
Did your grandfather take a day off?
Well, I can tell you a little bit about that. There's normally 440 men on the night shift, but because of the visit of the King and Queen, there was only about 103, 104. So there's only a quarter of the manpower there on that night shift. Now, at 1:30 in the morning, the explosion happened, and there were 2 men working out by, one called Humphreys and the other one called Wildman. And they were about half a mile to a mile from the coal face, and a blast of air blew them off their feet.
Good Lord.
The air reversed, which it does in an explosion. It blew them off, and I thought, that's peculiar.
The air reversed.
Yeah, and it was such a force
So
that
it
it
sucked.
knocked them off their feet.
So
And
when
the-
you say it sucks in, the plane sucks the
Well,
air in?
what happens when methane's ignited? Obviously, there's a flame, and methane does ignite between 5 and 15%, and at 9.3%, that's the worst explosion we'll get. But what happened at KB, which is happening in a lot of mines, not only did the methane explode because it was within the flammable limits, it actually ignited the coal dust, which then creates a far worse explosion. And as I say, it blew these two out-by workers off their feet. We were probably half a mile in the South Plain district. And these two men, crikey, what were that? And of course, they were both experienced. One was a road layer, the other one was a datler who did all kinds of different work. And he then thought, they said, well, there's something wrong here. Why did the air do that? Because it resumed, after that blast of air, it then resumed normal ventilation going around the workings. So Wildman, he decided that he would go through what they call air doors, which separate the intake roadway from the return roadway. Because if you didn't have doors, the air would short circuit all over the place. So he kept these doors in as barriers. And when he went through, he had to hurriedly run back because it nearly made him unconscious. And so what they did, they then contacted another man further out by, because all he could see, he knew that something was wrong. So they contacted this man who was nearer to the pit bottom, who contacted the surface to let them know that an explosion could have occurred. So obviously that happened at 1:30 in the morning. It was 4 o'clock in the morning before the rescue teams went underground. And there was 33 men working on the South Face district. And all of those men died. Some that were in the return, they were badly burnt. Some were merely bronze and are still sat there. And the men on the coal face, obviously they'd all gone. So they then, after the KB rescue team had been down, they then sent to the area for all rescue teams from all the other neighbouring collieries in the area to come and help with the rescue work. About 10 o'clock in the morning, they had started to get, but I didn't mention that after the explosion, the ventilation had restored to its former self, and everything was all right. And but what they had to, they knew that all these fatalities had occurred. So the rescue teams from Denby and KB collieries were summoned to rescue, get out the victims of the explosion. Meanwhile, what had happened, the mines inspectorate had been informed, and W.H. Pickering, who was the divisional inspector, several other inspectors came to the mine. Obviously, there's all the colliery management there. There's quite a lot of men went into the pit afterwards because everybody wants to help to get out the victims. So the rescue team went down about 10 o'clock in the morning. This was to recover bodies so the other rescue team could come out. And the Denby and KB colliery rescue teams went in, and they were recovering bodies. But at around about 11:30 a.m. there was a second explosion.
In the same place?
In the same area. And this explosion took 53 men.
Rescues?
All the rescue teams were killed.
Oh.
The inspector inspecting, the inspectors who were inspecting in the return gate, 3 inspectors, a colliery manager, they were also overcome when the second explosion occurred. Just, if ever you go into the Minster at Doncaster, you will see a plaque, and it is to the memory of W.H. Pickering, one of the inspectors who actually died in the explosion. And so this is where it relates to my grandfather. He was down the mine at the time, and when the explosion occurred, he was far enough out by, so he weren't killed, taking out a victim. He was reported missing, my grandfather.
He was taking out a victim.
And I don't know whether you know it, but it's like anything else when a tragedy happens. There were a lot of people that wanted to make a little bit of money out of it. And one of the locals in our village did a tapestry with all the names of the victims within a day of the explosion happening. And he did a list of all the victims who died in the embroidery, so he could sell it for a few coppers, if you like, in that day. And lo and behold, my grandfather's on the first one.
Good Lord.
Because the lists were inaccurate. And some hours later, after the explosion, suddenly he weren't dead. He'd been presumed as dead, but he hadn't died. So that's my grandfather's connection with the explosion, and of course my family's involvement with it.
So and that still exists, that tapestry?
Yes, there's one in Conisbrough Library. There's one in the Groves Workingmen's Club in Conisbrough. There's one in Denby and KB Miners Welfare. There's one in All Saints Church in Denby. There's one in Cushworth Hall, which is a big hall that's over that side of Doncaster. And there's one in the NUM East Quarters at Barnsley. There were 6 done.
And one has got your granddad's name on it?
The first one. And Denby has got at the Dane Valley Leisure Centre. There's a winding wheel there which is dedicated to all the men and boys that worked at Denby Main Colliery and all staff. And we have got the KB Main Colliery closed in 1986, and that's some 32 years ago or more.
Yeah.
Yes, 32 years, and in the next couple of months, we will be dedicating the memorial for KB Main Colliery, which of course is dedicated to all the people who work there. And during its lifetime, there were 233 fatalities at KB Main Colliery and over 1,000 major injury accidents.
Really?
And that's also dedicated to all the staff that worked at KB Main Colliery. There were 203 people died at Denby Main Colliery, but we were very, very fortunate at Denby that we never had an explosion during its 100 years.
Over what period of time would those deaths have occurred? How long was there?
Sometimes there could be 2 or 3 fatalities, and some years of 4 or 5. You know, I mean, we were open just over 100 years at Denby, 105 years, and with 203 accidents. KB was open from 1889 to 1986, some 87 years, and that had 233 fatalities. But don't forget, there was 93 of those associated with the KB disaster. And so I look at the safety record as Denby and KB collieries, and fatality-wise, it was, I think Denby had you know, take on all that it never had an explosion. It only had some 30 deaths, less than KB. KB was a pretty safe pit. It was just
Yeah.
unfortunate that
A couple of bad.
they had that accident in you know, I mean, any fatality is bad enough, but to have an explosion that killed so many people. There was 88 people died. But a little story I do know, there's a person called Frank Ward. He was recovering fatalities, and he was so overcome by the bringing out the mutilated bodies that a week later, after the explosion, he threw himself in the river
Really?
and drowned. Yeah, and the deputy, of course, obviously after an explosion, there's you know, of that magnitude, there was an inquiry, and the deputy who was in charge of the district, who were on the day shift, he actually, James Springthorpe, he was in such a bad state because when the explosion happened, he volunteered to go down and help, and he had inhaled that much afterdamp, which is carbon monoxide, that it made him really, really ill. And he died in the March following the explosion in July. And of course we had another fatality attributed to the disaster because one of the mines rescue men, a gentleman called Charles Burns from Manvers main rescue team, he was recovering the body in the months following the explosion, because it took about 3 months to get all the bodies out, because they had to seal it off to you know, to put out the underground fires that had taken place, build stoppings to suck out all the air and pump in carbon dioxide to kill the flames. And while they'd gone into the stoppings and bringing out these casualties, this Charles Burns, they put down the stretch and he pulled out his mouthpiece. And his men tried to put it back into his mouth, and his teeth were clenched, and he got up and ran off. And by the time it got to him and tried to get his mouthpiece in, he died. So that's why we say that it were 91 people that had died. I mean, I always do remember when I first started as a collier, and there would always a 1 day or a 2 or a 3 day strike, and people would walk out, and everybody walked out of the mine, and that was in the early 60s, and but things tended to quieten down. But lo and behold, in the 70s we had by then I was an official, of course, and but I do remember the few weeks disputes in 72 and 74, and then of course
Big one.
I mean, my father were in the 1926 strike, and they were out for 9 months, but of course the 1984 strike, that lasted for 12 months. And I'll be quite honest with you, yeah, just like most bits, we had a few people came back to work early, broke the strike, if I say,
Yes.
you know, and that didn't go down well with a lot of miners, but
Not very well at all.
and of course there was the police there, and you know, I was going underground, the police were there, but the pickets knew what we were doing. We were keeping the pits open, because if I weren't going down and inspecting the in-by workings and all the roadways, that, as I say, they appreciated what we were doing, because they knew at the end of the day that they would be coming back to work. And I used to go and have words with them at, you know, around the brazier from time to time in the harsh months, and in the summer months have a chat with them. And they had the odd collections, and we all used to throw us a little bit in to help them get by. And one I do recall is I was on duty on Christmas Day, December 25th, 1984, and I had a call on the phone in the powerhouse from the people that were stood round the brazier and round the pit gates, the entrance to the colliery, and will you come over for a minute? And I went over, and lo and behold, put a can of beer in me hand and wished me all the best.
Wow.
And one of my boys from the safety department was one of the guys on the picket at the time, and I shook his hand and said, well, it'd be nice to see you all back at work, and we appreciate that you're fighting for your cause. And then of course I went back, and the other lad went down and had a drink with them, which were good. And
meant a lot.
The comradeship was still there, and I remember them marching back in March of 1984, and of course one of our jobs were to train all the lads back, because everybody that went underground had to have what they call a self-fresh gear, and in the event of a fire or an explosion you put this self-fresh gear on, which would turn the carbon monoxide through something called upcolite and turn it into carbon dioxide. So they all had to be retrained, and the training officer and my safety officer, they did over 1,000 men self-fresh training before they were actually allowed to go back in the pit. If you've been had a fortnight's holiday, or somebody unfortunately had an accident and they've been off work for a few months, when you first went into the mine, you seemed to stumble a lot.
Really?
Yeah, and but after a few days, you're getting back into it, and and people would say, "Oh, you've been off work a fortnight, you've lost your pit legs." Yeah. And you'd say, "Yeah, they'll come back." It's funny, but they did. God. And because you've got to face it underground, the floor is not always even. You know, you've got rails, you've got sleepers, you've got little bits of rock and things of that nature, and you've got undulations, and changes of gradient and changes of height. You know, we've all walked into a girder, but that's when you say, thank goodness for the hard hat.
Yeah.
Because I've seen a few miners with blue scars that are in the days before the hard hat. They had the soft cap on and they walked into a girder, and I mean, I always remember as a young collier, the coal face I was working on, as we were advancing the face, till we'd gone by this old face of the road, we were closing in behind us, and it were, in some places it were hardly higher than that table. And I do remember coming off one day, and all of a sudden I crunch, and I walked in. At that time of the day we used covering boards, and they'd come down, they were all sharp split, and I walked into them. And fortunately I didn't I didn't get no blue marks, and otherwise I could have had the blue marks on my nose, but I always learnt then.
Oh, they're a badge of honour.
But yeah, you know, when you're walking in these low places, you have to have your 5-pint Dudley, which you used to put round your neck. I used to have a pair of shorts on, t-shirt, down there I put my snap, as they called it, which was your refreshment at the 20-minute snap time, as we called it, and of course in the other hand I got a 5-pound powder bag. Really? Because, well, we had to fire the coal out, well the shot fire they did anyway, on the gate and deputy, and so you were laden up, and by the time that you got to your work, sweat was...
So it's a hot pit?
Well, the park gate, you see, you have what's called the geothermic gradient. And the further you go down, the warmer it gets because of the heat of the strata. And I've worked in 96 degrees.
96? 96?
And high humidity, yeah. High humidity. And in fact, you used to use that. You used to perspire, or sweat as we always say, underground, and that you used to lose a lot of salt. And that time of the day when I worked in the tailgate stable, we used to put salt tablets in his water. But salt tablets, I don't know whether you've ever had any, but you put them in water, and it takes a couple of days to get used to them. But it puts like shall we say, a lemonade taste in. People, the one thing about when you put those in your doodle is somebody come into the roadway and wanted a quick swig out of your water bottle, and they get one little taste and they'll put it down because they weren't used to the salt tablets. But yeah, and the other thing about it, when you were working where it was heat, the first hard hats we had, they were made out of compressed cardboard.
Oh, God,
And because it was so hot, and you used to buy them, don't forget, they used to shrink.
Oh, God.
So on a Monday morning, you go to put your helmet on and it wouldn't fit.
Yeah.
So the first thing you did, where you filled your water bottle, is you used to get your hard hat and fill it with water. And with it being compressed cardboard, it
opens up.
It opened up and it would fit after a couple of minutes. And of course, but then after several months, that wasn't enough with the water in. So what we used to do then, there's a sweatband in, used to slit it, so that used to make it so that it fall on your head a little bit better. And then of course, when that had got to its extreme, we used to slit the other end so it did give a little bit more give, and but eventually you would have to go and buy another helmet. I think they were about 3 and 6pence then. But in 1962, 3 and 6pence were 3 and 6pence.
Yeah.
I could go out with a girlfriend with 10 shilling in my pocket and come into town, Doncaster, have a meal, a couple of drinks, go back home and still have change in my pocket.
Yeah.
That's after paying your bus fare. Good days.
Yeah.
But during my time on the railway, on the 14 years that I was there on the railway, we had a few miners that came from Pitsu, and I'll tell you what, the railway people loved them because they were so used to working hard, and they could adapt to any job. And I mean, I've walked along and come across a couple of men, and I've said to them, "You're from the mines, aren't you?" And they'd say, "How do you know?" I said, "Well, I can tell with the way that you're working." I mean, I came along one day and these guys are using this Silver 3, this almond. And I said, "You're a mining man, aren't you?" And he says, "Yeah." I didn't. I says, "Because I worked in the mines." And I'll tell you what, once they know from the mines, well, I was in the pocket. But what I had to do with the railway people, and I never ever heard anybody argue. And if I used to go along and catch them doing something they shouldn't be doing, I would get them on and say, "Right, I'm telling you all now, you've had your warning, final warning, one more and you'll be off." And they used to respect you for that. When I go and visit them next time, we'll be doing things right. And they respected it, which were great. And I said, that's how we do it. If you can't do it safely, and I say, if you've got somebody that's telling you to do something that's not safe, let me know, and I'll sort them out. And it worked. And of course, yeah, we used to argue underground, and you know, I'd find things that were wrong, but I'd get them put right. Because while it didn't get put right, the job wouldn't go. You know, it's simple as that. But I mentioned shot firing, and that's one of the jobs you've really got to be topside of your work, because you're relying on a sentry. You're relying on a sentry, and when you couple your wires up, the first thing you do is shout, "Fire!" so everybody can hear it. And don't forget, men, there's men who can't hear you, who you stand to send down the face. And I was just about to turn the key one day and I saw a light. Saw a light. And I come coupled and I went, the sentry had let somebody walk by. I would have fired on a man. And the thing about it is, boy, did I give it to that sentry. I never forgot. And to this day, never forgets.
You see him, do you?
Oh yes. But
Well,
yeah,
maybe.
that would have been the end of my start of my career. That if I'd have fired shots on somebody. But I mean, I do recall from years and years before I started in the industry that somebody had coupled the shot firing cable to the two signal wires, which we used to touch together for the haulage. And as the shot fire coupled up at the other end, the shots went off.
Oh, God.
He was lucky. He lived. But his face was peppered with blue mark. The thing about it is, though, your duty as a shot firer is to ensure that your cable that you use is safe at all times. And what I used to do, I had my own cable, because my two fellow shot firers didn't look after theirs. And I used to run mine out at the start of the shift, twist the wires together at the out by end,
Yeah.
and every time I'd fire around the shots, or a couple of round of shots, because you'd sometimes do that, I would wind it up and hang it up. I used to hate to see shot firers, and when I became a district, I used to say to them, for goodness sake, wind your cable, don't leave it lying around where people can walk on it, machines can go over it, because it'll cause you havoc. Because every time I coupled up, I got a circuit. They had more trouble with breakages in the cable. I said, it's because you're not looking after your cable. But, you know, some people don't take the same care, but it's the way you carry on.
Yeah.
I mean, I have been to Cap House, which is a good museum to the, and it is great that, you know, school children can visit it. And I did go about 3 years ago and visited the Cap House Gallery at Christmas time.
Oh.
And they actually got a grotto underground for the kiddies, and I thought, beautiful. I mean, Cap House is relatively shallow mine compared to the ones that we worked in, but once you're underground, if you turn your light out,
You don't know, do you?
You can't see your hand in front of you. And that's what I say, you relied on your working light. And I mean, in the old days, they used to have naked flames in there, and suddenly they were having explosions galore. And Sir Humphrey Davy, in his wisdom, invented the flame safety lamp.
Yeah.
And of course, then people tried screwing the base out, and to get to the flame so they could have a smoke. So they were still having a few explosions, and then they started to lock the bases of them. So there's also two gauzes in it, and also if you pull the base out, the flame will go out because it's in like a chimney section, and improved. But certainly, you know, the light of the flame safety lamp. We progressed to the bucket lamp, which had gone out just before I started, and they had the cap lamps, which were far superior. And of course, another big thing was, of course, we all had workwear introduced in the 80s, so we all had orange on, and that to me was a very, you know, to be seen. Yeah, you know, like a diesel coming towards you, at least you could see him, and you could see him coming, you could get into a refuge hole and let him by. So, you know, even the orange overalls had a good part to play with safety.
Well, I think I've done as much as I can. Have we reached the end of our moment?
You have exactly.
End of our time? Brilliant. Well, thank you so much.
No problem.
Brilliant.
You've only got another 20 tales to listen to.
Well, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. You'll be getting our plaster head.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. And there you are.
Yeah, marvellous.
You're a good head, as they say. Males are always a bit vague because they're the ones doing all the talking.
Yeah, that's right.
So we now make a mould of this, and then we get it into
that's
bronze.
good, that, Laurence. Yeah, thank you anyway.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.